Vaughn, let me start with you because we had this flurry of picks over the weekend by Trump's team. We mentioned he's now picked all 15 cabinet secretaries. Fill us in.
It was draft night. I mean, on Friday night, I was actually on a plane back from Florida here to New York, and all of a sudden, while on that plane ride, pick after pick after pick are coming in. He filled up the cabinet on Friday night. You see Scott Bessent, who is going to be his Treasury Secretary nominee, the biggest of that list. Russ Vought, though, is another name that folks are going to be hearing about. He is being nominated to return as his Office of Management and Budget Director. He is the one who was one of those key co-authors as part of the Project 2025 effort. People like Stephen Miller, who's incoming Deputy Chief of Staff, have touted that Vought is going to be in the position to effectively go in through the departments and agencies and help not only on appropriations, but also make sure that there's a cutting of the staffing reductions and also helping towards a cut of regulations that are currently in place. You also look at the likes of Lori Chavez DeRemer. She is somebody who just lost her reelection bid for Congress in the Pacific Northwest, but she is now being tapped to lead the Labor Department. And it's notable because she is pro-union and has been very defensive of unions, somebody that is, I think going to probably get quite a few Democratic confirmation votes. You also have the likes, though, of Sebastian Gorka, who is a MAGA provocateur, somebody who was in Donald Trump's first White House. He's going to be returning to the fold. Dave Weldon is somebody who served in Congress in the early 2000s, was actually an ally to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., suggesting that there was a preservative that was linked to autism. There is no science that is backing up that case that he and those two men have made, but he has been tapped to lead the CDC. Marty McCary has been tapped to lead the FDA, somebody who said that the federal government was the problem behind misinformation during COVID here. So we could spend hours going through each of these picks, but this was a big last week for Donald Trump. And now all of this is becoming very crystal about who's going to be around him in this White House.
And Ken, you have more on Trump's national security picks. What is the picture coming into focus as he fills out those specific roles?
Yeah, Anna, this national security team is really shaping up to be what could be a combustible mix of conservative but mainstream voices and some MAGA loyalists with really fringe ideas. So the choices of Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State and Congressman Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor were greeted with kind of a sigh of relief in the national security world, because these are people who have long experience in government and fairly normal Trump-era Republican foreign policy views. But somebody like Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, causing a lot of concern because of her history of distrust of the agency she would oversee and her support for leakers Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, to cite one example. And on Friday, as Vaughn said, Trump announced two more appointments that reflect, I think, this divide. Alex Wong for Deputy National Security Advisor. He's an experienced foreign policy thinker, mainstream. Sebastian Gorka, the NSC's director for counterterrorism. Now, Gorka, as Vaughn said, really controversial figure who served for only a few months in the first Trump administration before being forced out. He's been a far-right commentator on right-wing radio and the Newsmax TV network. In 2017, he drew criticism for wearing a medal associated with a Hungarian group with alleged historic links to Nazi Germany. He was also arrested that year for trying to take a gun through a TSA checkpoint at a D.C. airport. I will say that one thing all of these people have in common is skepticism about continued U.S. support for Ukraine in its war against Russia and a desire to cut some kind of a deal on it.
And Ken, what do we know about the vetting taking place with all these potential hires?
So the transition has not signed a memorandum of understanding, which is normally what is done. So there are no FBI background checks taking place right now at all. And take a listen to some disparate views about that over the weekend from some lawmakers.
As you know, there haven't been FBI background checks for any of these nominees. Do you agree with her, though, that this should happen before we get to confirmation votes?
I don't think the American public cares who does the background checks.
We require these background checks of line DEA agents, drug enforcement agents. We require it of first-time prosecutors for the federal government. Why wouldn't we get these background checks for the most important job in the United States government?
Just to be clear, private investigators don't have access to the same kind of information that FBI agents do. And it'll be really interesting to see if senators, among those who are going to be confirmed, will actually be satisfied with a lack of FBI background checks on it.
Ken Dilanian, thanks for your reporting. Melanie, how big is that background check issue or lack thereof with lawmakers who will vote to confirm?
Yeah, it is a big issue, even from Republicans. You hear them saying we can't have this traditional process skipped. If it doesn't come out on the front end when the Trump administration is doing the vetting of these nominees, it is going to come out on the back end. It also is going to delay the confirmation hearing process. I mean, technically, they could occur concurrently, but these senators are going to want to know all of this information before they make a critical decision about whether or not to approve these nominees. Not just Democrats, that does include Republicans. And so this is going to be a point of contention as these hearings get underway. They're going to want to ask for FBI files. We've already heard from Republican senators who want to particularly see the Tulsi Gabbard FBI files. She is the nominee to lead, the DNI, have access to the critical intelligence secrets. And so this is going to be something that is a fight on Capitol Hill.
And again, these picks have come kind of fast and furious, Eugene. The cabinet that's forming is a little all over the place. You have the Hard Right Project 2025 contingent, but then you have an abortion rights advocate in RFK Jr. up for the HHS job, a former Democrat in Tulsi Gabbard, a pro-union moderate at Labor, a former Soros advisor at Treasury. A team of randos is how Politico puts it. Is there a unifying thread in this cabinet to be?
Yeah, I mean, one is loyalty to Donald Trump, right? We've been saying that for the last couple of weeks as these things and these names have come into view, but also in a lot of these places, skepticism of and disdain sometimes for the very organizations and departments that they're going to be interacting with or leading. Right? When you think about someone like Tulsi Gabbard, like Mel was just talking about, when you think about HHS Secretary RFK Jr., when you think about even Pam Bondi, who is going to be his, if confirmed, his attorney general after Matt Gaetz' nomination burned down, like a lot of these people, if not all of them, have in the past said something is wrong with the agencies that they're in charge of. It also gives us a lot of insight into, and a reminder for those of us who may have forgotten, that for Donald Trump, he doesn't have consistent policy views, right? And so the fact that you have all of these kind of random ideas and thoughts thrown together, it's a reminder that when he thinks about these kinds of things, he's not thinking like we need to have a consistent policy view across the board. These folks are kind of all over the place.
Melanie, Republicans do have a decent margin now in the Senate, at least in the incoming Senate. What are the biggest concerns you're hearing from lawmakers over these cabinet picks? Do you suspect any of them are in jeopardy?
Well, as of right now, Republican senators are not going to come out and publicly say whether they're against someone or for someone. There's just no reason that they need to do that. We are still months away from this process. But the strategy for some of these Republicans has been privately telegraphing their concerns. That's what's happened with Matt Gaetz, the attorney general nominee who dropped out after 8 days. We're told there was as many as 10 Republicans behind closed doors that were signaling their opposition. So he's out of the way. I think the scrutiny is going to really ramp up on some of these other picks. Tulsi Gabbard, as I mentioned, that's a huge concern, even from Republicans on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which will be tasked with processing her nomination, have come out and said they have a lot of concerns, a lot of questions. And then I think Pete Hegseth is another one that's going to be very problematic. He has sexual assault allegations that he's going to have to answer for. He has said publicly he has committed no wrongdoing. Charges were never brought. But this is going to be something that Republicans have a lot of questions about. It's a huge, important agency. He was a former Fox News host. There are questions about his qualifications, whether he is tasked and qualified to lead such a complex agency, which has a massive budget and is in charge of millions of civilians and servants. So I just think that Republicans are going to be very choosy about how they use their political capital. They're not going to be able to stand up to a bunch of these nominees, but I do think there is an appetite to sort of vet these candidates and really put a microscope on some of them before they make these critical decisions.
Vaughn, we saw what happened with Gaetz and the kind of pressure campaign from behind the scenes that took place that ultimately led to him withdrawing. What is the latest from inside Trump world when it comes to Hegseth for defense secretary?
Right. I think when it comes to Pete Hegseth here, it's not only making sure that over the next 2 months you court each of these senators one by one and try to alleviate any of their concerns. But I think for Pete Hegseth, right, of course there's a sexual assault allegation, but this is where you're talking about somebody who, in Donald Trump, for 4 years, right, put pressure on his Pentagon. We know that because James Mattis, his former Pentagon secretary, told the American public so and wanted to use the military against U.S. citizens domestically, right? He has talked about sending in the military into the heart of major American cities. This is where Donald Trump, just just a couple weeks before the election, suggested that the military may need to be used on election days against the enemies from within. And so I think that this is, for Pete Hegseth, also going to be a moment in which he faces intense questioning from people like Joni Ernst, from people like Bill Cassidy and Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, over if he were to get such orders or such a request from Donald Trump, how would he respond? Those are very difficult questions that he is going to have to answer for and attest to, and that could be a hindrance to him not only getting confirmed, but also meeting Donald Trump's standards of what Donald Trump wants out of his next Pentagon secretary.
Eugene, the New York Times writes that Trump's picks roughly slot into three different sort of categories, if you will. Those who will dole out revenge, those who will calm Wall Street, and those who will downsize the federal government. Which of those missions will he have the easiest time carrying out without Congress?
That's a good question. I think, largely probably the retribution, right? When you think about, Republicans have for a very long time have wanted to get rid of the education department, for example. That's a department that was created by Congress. You can't just do that with the swift swish of a pen that we know of in any legal way, right? And so those aspects of it, the shrinking down of the workforce is going to be really tough. I talked to some folks within the DOJ who were obviously looking at this in a lot of different ways. And the sense within there is that there's going to be a long legal process of this, right? Even when you think about the DOJ with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, pulling some of these strings of bureaucracy are going to be caught up in lawsuits for a really long time. So a lot of these threats and the movement might happen, but the end result may take much longer than folks actually think it's going to take.